joined at this point by Tirana Hassan, who's the Crisis Response Director at Amnesty International. She joins us live from London. Tirana, thank you for joining us live here on Republic TV. First of all, we went through the entire report, and it's something that we've also reported on in the past. But the scale of the massacre and the details that have emerged in the Amnesty International report that you have published speaks about in detail how Rohingya terrorists massacred Hindus. First of all, for our viewers who are joining us this afternoon, Tirana, can you take us through the details of this report and what your findings were in brief?
Certainly. Thank you for having us. This report is an important piece of research which sheds light on a previously little known abuses that were perpetrated by what is believed to be the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army, known as ARSA, yes, which is an armed group, an armed Rohingya group. Now, on the 25th of August, ARSA attacked a number of security posts, approximately 30, across northern Rakhine State. This was then followed by a unprecedented reaction from the security forces, which has driven close to 700,000 Rohingya into Bangladesh. We have, since August and September, been in the camps in Bangladesh interviewing survivors and eyewitnesses to the violence who have told us about security forces, Myanmar security forces, which have been burning homes and killing. We also were able to speak at that point to 8 Hindu women who had fled, and it was the massacre that they had survived, which we have documented in our most recent report. And essentially what our findings are is that there were up to 99 members of the Hindu community which were killed by Rohingya armed fighters on the 25th and 26th of August, and these require a thorough investigation. Now, one of the challenges that Amnesty International has had, and why it has taken us so long, because these abuses took place in August, is that the government of Myanmar has actually restricted access to independent human rights investigators. So it's fundamentally important, if there is to be justice and accountability, both for the killings of the members of the Hindu community as well as for the killings of members of the Rohingya community, that independent investigators, including the UN, should be allowed into the areas where the violence took place.
Tirana, what you say is relevant and vindicates the stand of India, Indian media, and also the Indian government, because we have been saying and reporting about the massacre of Hindus and the mass graves that were found in the Rakhine state in Myanmar. Now, I want to ask you, because in the Indian context, this becomes relevant because there has been a debate around allowing mass entry of Rohingya refugees into India on our soil. In that context, I want to ask you, is there a need to be cautious while allowing Rohingyas enter India in large numbers? Because that has been a concern of India and the Indian government. Where does Amnesty stand on that? My specific question, is there a need to be cautious on allowing people to enter in mass numbers without checking their backgrounds?
So it's a very fair question, and of course, all states have a right to exercise, particular security measures that ensure that their populations can be safe. What I would encourage India and the Indian media to heed caution is that it's very dangerous to start sort of implying that because there was a Rohingya armed group which carried out abuses not only against the Rohingya community, not only against the Hindu community, but there are also allegations of violence perpetrated against members of the Rohingya community as well as against other minority groups. But this collective of armed fighters, which were part of ARSA, does not imply that all of the Rohingya population are part of an armed group. So any sort of notion that all Rohingya pose a security threat is probably just tarnishing everybody with the same brush and is not particularly wise. What I would say is that a government that has a responsible and well-resourced security apparatus such as India does have have the resources to do this sort of appropriate screening. And that means that you're looking for a small portion of individuals who may pose a threat. But that is most certainly, out of the 700,000 people who have been driven, the Rohingya people who have been driven from their homes in Myanmar, it would be very dangerous and, questionable to imply that all of these people posed a security threat. A lot of these people are women and young children.
Tirana, the reason why I ask you that question is because here in India, the government in an affidavit in the Supreme Court, that's the highest court of India, has said that they have intelligence about some of these terrorist elements or those who may have links to ARSA also possibly entering India, which is of course a threat to national security here in India. Where you are sitting in the UK, you will also appreciate that governments across the world will have to be careful at a time like this. And there are thousands of Rohingyas who have entered India already, and they are refugees in India as we speak. So in that sense, my specific question to you is there a divergence of views between Amnesty International and Amnesty India? Because in Amnesty India, led by Akar Patel, there has been a campaign against the government, I would say, asking for the Indian government to allow Rohingyas to enter, and in large numbers. Is there a divergence, is there a difference of opinion between Amnesty International and Amnesty India?
Oh, that's a very easy question to answer. Absolutely not. Amnesty India and Amnesty International have the same position on this. And what we need to remember is the people who are currently fleeing Myanmar, or the people that fled since August 2017, and even before that, as a matter of fact, are fleeing persecution. They are fleeing targeted violence. These are individuals who have a right to seek refuge. These are essentially refugees who are seeking safety. And as a responsible international citizen, India should be India should take its responsibilities to provide shelter to those seeking refuge as is required under international law.
I'm going to specifically quote Amnesty International India to you, Tirana, because you're speaking to us from London and you're the Crisis Response Director. The quote of Amnesty India was, Rohingya people are continuing to flee persecution in Myanmar in what has become the world's fastest growing refugee crisis. Forcibly returning Rohingya refugees to Myanmar where they face ethnic cleansing would just be a violation of India's obligations under international law, but also a blemish on India's history of supporting those fleeing persecution. And the reason I'm asking you this is because you made a specific point about adequate security precautions that need to be taken but may not have been taken while allowing these refugees in large numbers, and which has been the trend that we are seeing, their entry into Bangladesh and then into India. What are your comments on that?
I fully support, and Amnesty International fully supports the position of Amnesty India. We fully agree. That's our position also. What I was saying was not that there needs to be a screening before they enter. People are fleeing acts of violence which are somewhat unfathomable. If you go back and actually look at Amnesty's documentation of the abuses, both of this massacre that we released, the details of which we released today, but as well as the dozens of other reports and comments that Amnesty has made on the violence that has taken place in northern Rakhine State, the brutality and the targeted, widespread and systematic nature of the violence committed by the Myanmar security forces against the Rohingya clearly shows that they have been targeted, that these are crimes against humanity. The fact that they are fleeing into Bangladesh and into India and seeking refuge in other countries is a legitimate one. People are literally running for their lives, and it is important that the international community, India included, live up to their obligations under international law to ensure that those are fleeing persecution are allowed safe passage and safety and can be and then can be assessed for refugee status, for refugee protection. There is absolutely no doubt that there is a need to do that. What I was saying is that India will, as it should be, conducting any sort of determination about an individual Rohingya's ability to seek refugee status. They're able to take whatever precautions that are necessary. But any implication that there should be a justification that because there was the existence of a Rohingya armed group, which means that all Rohingya pose a security threat, is simply just not true, and actually it's not very rational.
We of course are against allowing armed refugees, and especially those with links to terror. And my question to you is, because when Amnesty International India carried out a campaign in August last year, around that time, there was no mention of the massacre of Hindus, which of course was reported back then. I think it happened in August. It was reported around that time, August and September, but there was nothing said about this massacre. And now that this report is out, would you then urge governments in India and also in Myanmar to get to the back of this entire massacre and to get to the bottom of the truth of who was responsible and bringing them to justice?
Let's be very clear that if there's going to be any sort of investigation, there must be an investigation. And that investigation should actually look at abuses that were carried out by all sides. So that is, one of the things that we're calling for right now is for the Myanmar government to allow independent human rights investigators, including the UN fact-finding mission, access into Northern Rakhine State so that there can be a thorough investigation into abuses which have been conducted by all sides, and whoever they target and whoever were the victims deserve to have justice and accountability. So that will include potentially the members of the Rohingya armed group known as ARSA, as well as members of the Myanmar military. And so what needs to happen, without a doubt, is a thorough independent investigation. It is clear that the Myanmar authorities do not have the ability or credibility to be able to do that themselves. And so there needs to be access for journalists, for independent human rights investigators, and there needs to be action from the Security Council. Amnesty International has been calling for the UN Security Council to refer the situation of Myanmar to the International Criminal Court, because it is very clear what we have seen from August 2017 onwards rises to the levels of crimes against humanity. And the only way that there will be resolution for this is that there is justice and accountability, and the place that should be heard is the International Criminal Court.
Well, Tirana, thank you for speaking to Republic TV, and it's important that you put all of these points into perspective, because at the end of it, here in India, there is a lot spoken about. There is one side of the story that's put out of the Rohingya humanitarian crisis, but very little spoken about how there are armed elements as well who may have gone unchecked. Now, that's a national security issue, and the government is tackling that. Thank you for joining us, Tirana. Thank you for speaking to Republic TV.